Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson, and today my guest, once again, hailing from the world of Darker Days Radio, is Bryce. So, Bryce, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good, Terry. How's things in your neck of the woods?
In COVID-adjusted terms, things are fine. I am making yet more progress on my SRD, and this weekend I decided to include vehicles, and I think I found my two new favorite nonsensical rules in Mage. Plowing away on that. Every time I think I have a rule section figured out, I discover more nonsensical rules that are like woven between the other rules. The rules for how many additional dice are absorbed by a vehicle during a collision are not listed in the ramming and collision section and are only listed in the chart of vehicle types.
Why would you need that in the actual, rule section of the rules, though? That just seems superfluous to me.
Yeah. But any interesting projects in your world?
We're doing an end-of-year retrospective newsletter right now over at Darker Days. We're working on that. We are also planning to release, I'm not sure when this episode is coming out, but before Christmas, we are releasing a Christmas episode.
Oh, awesome. Our topic today is action in Mage. And the first thing is kind of what is action? And this is one of those cases where I love the Wikipedia definition because of like the word choice that they use. And the stipulated definition I'm going to run with is a genre noted by the protagonist being thrust into high energy activities such as violence, extended fighting, physical feats, rescue, and frantic chases.
Just to add on to what Wikipedia has to say, I would say that the protagonist has to have the abilities and or skills to deal with those situations, because if you are thrust into a high energy, violent situation with extended fighting and physical feats, and you do not have the abilities to deal with those, then you're not in action, you're in thriller genre.
That's a good differentiation to make. Close to that to me is also the idea of an adventure game, which to me is noted by the character choosing to leave a place of safety. This is an arbitrary line. Everyone is welcome to argue with us on their definitions. Please note that you are wrong. That the line between action and adventure is whether or not the character is thrust into the action or chooses to leave. I don't have a strict line of any sort. Like, do you have a favorite like action movie or action style like media that just says like action?
Well, I mean, given the season, it would be wrong of me not to say Die Hard. When I think of a prototypical action movie, Die Hard is the one that I think of.
Yeah, I am a Mission Impossible fan, mostly because of how nonsensical the technology they depict is. Where, like, I fully respect that Tom Cruise can do a scene where he's like firing a Gatling gun while hanging from a helicopter and holding onto like three infants with one arm. But the fact that they give him like a contact lens that has the ability to look over an entire plane to find the single crooked Swiss lawyer that he needs to fight in the bathroom later, that's the part where I'm like, oh yeah, give me what I need. So yeah.
Have you seen any of the Fast and Furious movies?
No, and that is entirely my own fault.
I think that those would make, after the first one, which is kind of, sort of ish realistic for an action movie, I think that those would make just a great little group of disparates who focus on car magic and family.
You really need to have both legs of that stool. That would imply a two-legged stool. The third one, I guess.
The third leg is Vin Diesel, sir.
Oh, sorry. Completely wrong.
And those two legs hate each other.
Yes. I was somewhat disappointed that the third one was not Tokyo Drift, was Tokyo Drift instead of Three Fast, Three Furious. I was kind of disappointed that the one that involved Charlize Theron was not Fast and the Furiosa. And one of the things that I think is interesting about action is it is the direction a lot of World of Darkness games go, even if that is not necessarily what is intended by World of Darkness. I am generally of the opinion that Mage is not explicitly a horror game, unlike a lot of the other games in the old World of Darkness, but that it is urban fantasy. So to me, it should theoretically lend itself more towards action without breaking as much versus maybe vampire or werewolf, but that's just like a rough feeling.
You had me with vampire, but And Werewolf is all about just going out and tearing stuff down and blowing stuff up and ripping dudes in half. That's an action game.
So the thing that I find interesting about that is Mage is the only X20 line that has durability and structure rules, which are the rules in Mage that are basically how hard is it to affect this thing, like in terms of how much damage before it starts breaking and how much breakage before it doesn't move anymore. And I was kind of surprised that Werewolf doesn't have that. How do you think genre-wise action fits into Mage?
Well, Mage, by its exceptionally mutable setting, can be a lot of genres. You can have the deep introspective philosophical debates about paradigm and what it means to raise up humanity towards ascension, or you can be, special agent John Courage out there, tracking down reality deviants in their Monte Carlo casinos and tagging them and bagging them and bringing them in. It's a very wide open game that you can fit a lot of things in, including, but not limited to, action.
And one of the things that kind of gets me is this is something that took us a little bit of time in RPGs to figure out, and that is how to make the mechanics, the setting, and the theme of the game all point at each other. I really like a game where those three all kind of reinforce each other. Blades in the Dark is kind of my go-to example, but from what you're describing, it sounds like V5 did a good job of that, where the rules, the themes, and the setting all kind of reinforce each other. Is that the case?
V5 does that incredibly well, and it's partially due to Ken Height and company, who just went in and redid everything basically from the ground up system wise.
Yeah, I remember listening to Ken Height in an early interview where they're like, okay, we're going to get rid of botches and we're going to make everything that's a 6 or higher be a success. And then he commented, "Congratulations, Ken, you just invented the coin flip." So
yeah.
And that eventually changed. He also talked about it's a game where there are people practicing who have been scheming for hundreds of years in subtle political machinations, and the game gave no systems for that until V5. So I generally appreciate Ken Height's work. Setting to me is kind of easy because every action movie setting can exist somewhere in Mage. If you want to have a fight on an oil derrick, you can. If you want to have it atop a industrial refinery of some sort, as your agents are taking down a branch of Megadon Pharmaceuticals or something like that, that is easy enough. And then you have entire umbral realms, which can just be like the realm of action or something like that. It's real easy to get the place part down pat. Have you done any proper like adventure chronicles? Do you have any locations that are memorable for you?
No, we just tend to add that into our chronicles as it comes up. We don't really have, we're going to the high umbral realm of explosions.
Yep.
Although that really does sound like a fun place to visit, so I might have to add that next time I run Mage.
Yeah. I like the idea though that it's like the epiphany of explosions, that it is this high refined thing that only the most austere of minds can go to, and it's like, who is the lord of this realm? Lord Kaboom. Yes. I did have my characters have a fight between two subway cars, which was probably one of the most thorough suspensions of disbelief ever required, because in Philadelphia, the subway through Center City stops every 2 blocks. So it's not exactly a white knuckle ride on a roller coaster. It's like, we have 7 seconds before they will probably come to a stop again.
Now, I know you mean that you had them fighting within subway cars, but when you said a fight between 2 subway cars, I pictured, subway car 1 and subway car 2 just duking it out.
Or it'd be even better if it were like an emotional fight, like this car is giving this other car the silent treatment. Like this car came home and it had strange grease on it, and
you know what he did. Yeah. He knows what he did.
So mechanically, though, the question then becomes, what tools do we have in our toolbox to make it action? And the first simple one is the power of the willpower stat, where you blow a point and you get a success. There are a bunch of different ways to modify this if you want. it is not unreasonable to go a more exalted route and have willpower be a fuel for things. Later on, we'll talk about maneuvers. Willpower to me is an underutilized gas tank within the game that kind of represents maybe personal reserves or something like that. But if a storyteller wants to be like, hey, you can blow 1 willpower point for success, or you can blow 2 to do something spectacular, and if it works, you get 1 back. Listen to the episode I did with Ray Cole on modifying systems to achieve theme. How do you see willpower in an action game?
Willpower is that old, I push myself beyond what I should be capable of through sheer force of will trope in action games. It's John McClane, to go back to Die Hard, my favorite action movie, going through that field of broken glass and getting his feet all torn up. That's a willpower roll to avoid getting torn apart by the machine guns. It's a real big, it should be a real big thing in Mage, especially among all the World of Darkness games, given that they begin with the most willpower of any splat.
You made mention of the willpower roll to go through the gunfire. Is that something where you would also need to dodge, or do you believe that it's one of those things where you can just tell players blow 2 points of willpower to make it through the the gunfire barrage?
In a regular, degular, standard Mage game, I would say that you would also have to make a roll, but you would get, you'd get your automatic success on top of whatever you rolled on the dice. So you're not gonna botch and get completely, absolutely murdered on this. If we're playing an action chronicle, then yeah, you spend 2 willpower, a willpower per gunman or whatever you're trying to dodge. And yeah, it's just an automatic success. You made it through. You're not out of the clear fully, but you're in a better position.
I am also toying around with a mechanic where willpower can be used as kind of additional health levels to push yourself beyond what you can take. Like, once you're dipped into the willpower as health levels thing, like this is after you've already hit incapacitated or what have you, like you can willpower your way back to some degree of health. And if you do not in some way get a severe patch up job before the scene ends, you die, but you at least made it through. So that allows you to do like your heroic last stand and such, to at least finish before the 17 bullets in your abdomen kind of get the better of you.
Ooh, if you combined that with a bleed effect, where every action you take once you're dying requires you to spend a willpower, so that you have a very limited number of resources to spend, that might make it even more fun.
For certain values of fun. So this is the next one is one that I kind of go both ways on. Like, I kind of like botching as an idea, and it can sometimes be dramatically appropriate because sometimes the grenade pin accidentally falls out, or the timer is busted and you have to come up with a sudden kludge for that. But like, it puts a lot of weight on the storyteller to come up with a botch that is exciting and not flat out destructive. And I think that is like hard.
So the problem there is a lot of tables, and I'm including myself in this because we're all guilty of the sins that we talk about. A lot of tables don't follow the only roll if it's exciting, or if there's a fun if you fail. So I mean, obviously, if you're in a sword fight, it's fun if you kill that guy. And if you're in a sword fight, it's fun if your hero is stymied here. It's even fun if he's on death's door at the end of this and he gets taken, captured, and wakes up tied up by the ogre, hanging upside down in his cave, getting ready to be turned into soup. But if there's not a way to move forward in a failure state, then you shouldn't be rolling.
What do you mean by that?
So if it's binary pass fail, that's boring. That's not a good story. Okay, so let's say that I'm in the DMV. I'm trying to look up information on the van that I saw speed away with my girlfriend and kids or whatever in the back. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I've broken into the DMV. I've gotten into their computer system to make this computer's roll to determine what information I get. Well, if I pass, great. I get the information. I figure out who the owner of this van is, where it's registered, all that fun stuff. If I fail, I don't get any information. That's boring. There's no way to move forward from, all right, you don't get anything.
Almost more than boring, it is frustrating. I can see an exception to that being if, as a storyteller, the players are like, okay, here are 4 avenues we can look into. Like, we can look into the security camera footage. We got a shot of the plate. Jim was able to throw a tracker onto it, but they went somewhere hidden or something like that. it is acceptable for one of those to fail because you have backup options. But when that last one fails and there's just nothing, you're like, duh. And that is frustrating as shit, to use the technical term. Is that something where there is a mechanic to deal with that, or is that just something that a storyteller needs to consider in planning?
The mechanic to that is don't roll if there's no fun. if there's no fun failure. If you get to that point and the only options that you as the storyteller can think of are, well, if they pass, they get the information. If they fail, I guess they go back home and wait for the kidnappers to contact them. They get that information. They get the information they need to move the story forward. To steal from a different game, the Trail of Cthulhu game, Gumshoe, if you have a skill, you get an investigative skill in Gumshoe, you automatically get information. If you spend the points or make the roll in the World of Darkness terms, then you can get additional information. So you're always going to get, to use the we're trying to track down this van example again, you're always going to get where the van is registered as, where its home office is, stuff like that. If you succeed on the roll, you might learn that it was reported stolen a few days ago. If you get even more successes or spend even more points, then you'll learn that the guy who reported it stolen has a criminal background as a kidnapper, or he's been in situations like this before. So you learn that, oh, okay, so they reported it stolen, but odds are that the guys who own this company just own a lot of vans so that they can report them stolen for when they need one for nefarious purposes.
Yes. Reasons for report, nefarious purposes. Like, I like seeing that clearly pictured on the form.
That's why you incorporate.
Yes.
Why else?
The idea that there are a core number of clues that you will always get regardless, I am a big fan of. I kind of hate perception checks as an idea. It's one of those other things I kind of waffle back and forth on, because it's like, yeah, if someone's like super noticey, I don't know what the perceptive, good job with words, Terry, you kind of want to incent players to have that. But at the other end of the spectrum, something I will commonly do is what I call success shifting, where a failure is a success is an exceptional success, and a botch is a failure. So the odds of that thing utterly going sideways is so minuscule. It is a question of how much do you succeed by, which is a way I use to have it do that without completely handing the information to the player. Like, some players are like, hey, I got this without having to make a roll. You're just holding my hand through this story. And I found that success shifting allows me to sidestep that feeling, even if the dice came up a failure, because players have no idea what difficulty I set. So unless it's obviously like all twos, no one's called me out on that yet. Hopefully none of my players are listening.
I might have to steal that for future.
The other thing about botches to me in games is, in action games, in general, unless you're doing like an action comedy, the characters are presumed to be competent. If there is a botch related to an action, it doesn't have to be because the character really messed up that action. Like, somebody failing on a persuade roll doesn't need to have like farted in the middle of it. That can be an excuse for the storyteller to be like, okay, and that is when the gunman in the crowd trying to kill the prime minister starts firing, or something like that. I would certainly consider that a botch. Your persuade roll didn't succeed because the prime minister was shot. But also, it preserves the idea that in action movies, the heroes are generally competent. So changing botches from something the character screwed up to the way in which the world intervened, I think, is a better framework to look at it.
That's much more difficult to come up with a reason on the fly, just like you were saying before. But it can be something as simple as, the action was slow, so the door opened and somebody came in with a gun trying to disarm that bomb. So you rolled real poorly, and now rather than the bomb just blowing up and killing everybody because you botched, the countdown timer is moving twice as fast. It's just upping the stakes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's something that wasn't in peril is suddenly perilous. Something that was thought secure is suddenly in play again, or what have you.
And to go back to one of my favorite examples, Blades in the Dark does this really well. They have the 3 levels of engagement.
Controlled, risky, and desperate.
There you go. I was going to say safe, dangerous, and super dangerous. But yes, the actual terms are even better than the ones I came up with.
There's a Forged in the Dark system that uses your terms, I have no doubt.
There is now.
Yeah.
where if things are controlled, you planned ahead, you did your homework, you're in a situation where you basically know what's going on, and even if you mess up, you're not gonna get super hurt or damaged or have to run screaming because, oh no, here's the cops. But if you screw up there, then it goes from controlled to, you might not have really alerted the guards by tripping that wire, but they're going to send someone to check on it soonish.
And a lot of games have some sort of heat meter, where instead of in Old World of Darkness, the difficulty just increasing by one each time, which sometimes narratively doesn't make any sense and sometimes it does. This is one of those things where there's only a finite number of times you can try until the world intercedes. Again, this is a narrative contrivance. This is a statement about how the game world works, not necessarily how the world in the game works. Where it's like, yeah, under normal circumstances, you could twiddle this with this lock until it were undone an arbitrarily large number of times and eventually get in. But we're going to say within the narrative of this world, you will only ever get 3 tries before something else happens within the story that makes you at least make a hard choice about whether or not you want to continue fiddling with it. I guess the biggest thing that probably promotes action in Mage is magic. Action tropes are super useful for hiding vulgar magic, or it can be used as a paradigm. Like the action tropes part is pretty straightforward. The exploding gas main is kind of a recurring thing. Mage 20 introduces rules on how to shoot a car's gas tank, which I find somewhat questionable because did we really need rules for that? The other interesting thing is the idea of action or action movies as a paradigm. When you think of possible paradigms in the game as an action movie, are there any that you feel like lend themselves towards that?
Whoa. Yeah, you're you're Keanu in the Matrix. You're Neo. You're a virtual adept. So reality is a simulation. You're just hacking reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can hack reality, yeah, you can make it so that oh hey look, you rolled really well on your entropy effect, so yay, you won the lottery. It's unlikely, but it could happen, and you changed reality so that your numbers came up, yay. Or you are a different kind of reality hacker, and now you can run along walls and shoot Uzis with each hand and do double backflips in your long trench coat and take out hit marks.
What is your relationship to hit marks? Like, I have never actually had one in a game. I'm always curious when I hear stories of players fighting hit marks. I feel like they've missed the point. Like, to me, to quote B. David Walters, the hit mark is the sign that you need to run, not the sign that you need to stand and fight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is what they were used for when I was, playing Mage back in college. Yeah, when the technocracy shows up and they call in the hit marks because your cabal is just wiping the floor with the enlightened citizens that they have on hand. That's when it's like, okay, well, hey, we're just gonna pick up our toys.
Yeah.
We're gonna mosey on back to the chantry. Sorry about that. These things happen. This is all.
There must have been some terrible misunderstanding. Yeah.
I'm not. It's my day off. I'm not even supposed to be here today. It's a fun example to try to beat up a hit mark because it's the Terminator. You can't beat up the Terminator.
But the idea that we live in a simulation, it's one of those things where it very much lends itself towards action movie tropes. That if your character believes that reality is a simulation, by modifying it, you're modifying it in such a way that may actually already exist within the base code. There may be literal cheat codes baked into reality. If you want to take the cosmogony of Demon the Descent, in that reality is just kind of this hyper advanced program that is manipulable by sufficiently advanced entities. Paradigmatically, anything you've seen in a movie has already been established in an reality, so why not establish it in ours? Another one that comes to mind is the idea of a character becoming, taking on the mantle of the folk hero or the action character, living up to the Jungian archetype of action hero. A character with modern pagan practices or even chaos magic, the idea that you can temporarily take upon the mantle of the action hero is another paradigmatic justification you can use for having this while still maintaining pretty well the core themes of Mage.
The Verbena book talks about pulling on the mythic threads
Or hyper narrative if you're an NWO agent. Yep.
right. you're not anything special. You're just a regular guy. But in, any circumstance, given the right circumstances, anybody can embody the ideal of the warrior or the defender or the father who has a certain set of skills.
Who seems to need to employ them a lot. I don't know how abduction prone Liam Neeson's children actually are.
He is actually the worst father. His kids and wife get kidnapped
Yeah.
constantly.
That, the other one that gets me is one of the paradigms that's listed in M20 is might makes right, which I don't get how that is a paradigm, like how you literally do magic with might makes right. But action movies are one of the closest cases I can think of where a character could make a claim like, I am the top of the heap, I am heir to Hermes Trismegistus or something like that. The universe will bend before me in these ways that I have seen in action movies. That's the closest I can get. Do you actually know how that paradigm works?
I would assume, and this is just an assumption, that the closest thing that I can come up with in relation to a might makes right paradigm would be to go over to my shelf, Unknown Armies, and lift the masterless man archetype.
Okay, what's that?
Unknown Armies is a different game from which you can draw lots of inspiration. It's about people who do magic by doing things for the wrong reasons. So they have a group called the Bibliomancers. All of their magical power comes from books. It's not from reading books, it's not from the knowledge contained within books. It's from going out and getting rare books and putting them on a shelf, which is where you keep things. In addition, they have some characters who, rather than do magic through paradox of doing things wrong or for the wrong reasons, they embody certain archetypes. So you can have a character who embodies the archetype of the mother, and they can do things that are healing and comforting. And you can have people who are the archetype of the warrior, whose abilities are more martial. And you can have people who are the archetype of the masterless man, and their abilities are basically they can tell anybody to go fuck themselves because they're in charge of who they is. It's a real interesting system, and that is as close as I can get to might makes right as a character concept or as a paradigm concept.
So the paradigm would be something like you have the mantle or the idea that you have such self-control or such autonomy in the universe that mere opposition by others cannot dissuade you, and that kind of becomes a cornerstone of your magic, that you have done whatever to establish yourself as this archetype, and you cannot be shoved from it, and any magic that would prevent you from having your actions unduly influenced are going to fit within things that are allowable by your character and probably coincidental in a lot of cases, I think.
Right. If you have this paradigm of the masterless man, and somebody say that you're being arrested by the cops and they put their handcuffs on you, well, you can break out of those handcuffs because nobody can master you. But if you meet someone who is of higher station than you, and you bow before them, you relinquish some of your power to them, that is paradox. That will cost you.
My next rule mechanism is the rule of cool, which is just the idea that if players do cool shit and describe it well, let them. I had one character that was run by a player who very rarely kind of flexed, who was very much like, I don't know if I can do this in my paradigm. And one time she's like, okay, I'm going to point at every one of the locks in the room and flip my fingers up and lock them in succession to try and scare the shit out of this person. I'm like, I'm going to allow it. That is something that I think is terribly useful. Assuming your players know that that's a thing, you may want to tell them that ahead of time. That way they know what they're working with. Otherwise, that becomes messy.
And sometimes you have to remind your players that you're on their side and you want things fun to happen for them. Player in the last game that I ran, I told him, all right, so you're going to escape from here. Tell me how you do it in a cool way. And he's like, okay, well, if I tried this, what if I tried that? I'm like, whatever you want to do is what's going to happen. You just tell me how you do it and how it looks cool.
Yeah.
I had to tell him this 3 times before he realized I wasn't going to make him roll for it.
Yeah. Just tell me how you're putting your shoulder behind it, and we're going to let this happen. I'm a big fan of that also as a way to speed up a narrative, to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you're in the back of the cop car, but we only have 45 minutes left in the session, and I still want this one final showdown. Tell me how you did the cool thing. I think is good, and it lets the players flex. I am thrown off by players with no ability to improvise in that regard, who are kind of bound by the system. So my only note is to, if you plan on doing that, kind of establish that with your players and maybe indicate that it is a departure. Maybe it takes 2 or 3 times to get across. Another thing to consider is the mix of traits that you want to have in your game. So Mage by default, you have the 9 attributes, and then you have the roughly 30 abilities. This game is replete with secondary traits, which I absolutely hate.
Tell me about stone lore.
Yeah. It's OP. It's just nuts.
You can do anything with it. But, sometimes you got to have that character who has 5 dots in chess.
Yeah. It's so... But what you can do in an action chronicle is rearrange the abilities, where you can say, hey, the character sheet describes the kind of game you're going to play and make certain expectations. Like, mages don't have animal ken as a stat, but they do have meditation, and that tells you something about werewolf versus mage in like a small way. If you're going to have a kaboom chronicle, like, break firearms into large arms and small arms, or add artillery for really big guns, break out larceny from streetwise. Maybe on the flip side of this, combine esoterica science and academics and research into just like smarts to make more space for explosive knowledge and additional explosives knowledge. Do you have any favorite secondary abilities or ones that you would be first to drop in an action game?
Well, I'm afraid now to mention that I do enjoy stone lore, but yeah, adding artillery or adding archery, which is a fun old-fashioned secondary ability, or chemistry, which I guess is kind of science for bomb making, stuff like that.
Bombsmanship.
As far as I'm aware, there's no explosions skill or demolition skill on the main mage book, but if you're gonna have an action game, you might want to have one of those.
It's also a case where you can use these secondary traits to give the players kind of fiat. For instance, the Akashic Brotherhood revised book introduced strategy as a secondary trait. And if you want to promote that and be one of those things, make a strategy roll. And this tells me how much cool stuff you can pull off in this fight. Like, you roll strategy plus wits or something once per combat encounter, and that gives you a pool of successes that allow you to add to other rolls or something like that. The key to me is to keep the count about the same rather than just adding these on. Otherwise, it just kind of dilutes the points the players have. But to make that declaration ahead of time, or allow players to temporarily reallocate points in a way that would make sense. Much more information on these are available in Book of Secrets, or if you're not using M20, Book of Shadows.
The beauty of secondary skills was, when they were introduced, that they were cheaper because they were much narrower focus.
Mm-hmm.
So if you promote them to be regular abilities, then you're saying that you're going to be paying for these because you're going to be using these. So if you're running the game, occasionally look over what your characters have or what your players have on their sheets and say, it's been a while since we used Tammy's Streetwise here. Let's go ahead and include an encounter that requires anybody on the party, to roll Streetwise. Give your characters a chance to shine based on where they've spent their points, not just where you think they should have spent their points by, changing the abilities list around.
Yeah, as Eddie Webb says, a character sheet is a vote for the type of game that you would like to play. And I very much like that as an idea. The last kind of rule system to me that lends itself towards action was the idea of maneuvers. In Tales of Magic Dark Adventure, or Dark Adventure Magic Tales, or Dark Tales Adventurous Magic, I can... introduced maneuvers, which were these mixes of magic plus another role to do something cool. Like, if you wanted to create a stunning entrance, you could use mind or forces or entropy before you entered a room to have everyone get quiet, coincidentally, as happens periodically, and just kind of have everyone notice you enter at the same time. And this was a neat idea. I wish it had a little bit more system behind it, because it's one of those things where a player isn't going to know to do this unless they know that maneuvers like this exist. Additionally, it ran into problems paradigmatically where you would have to be like, wow, I'm about to enter this room. Time for me to spend 4 hours on this ritual because that's paradigmatically appropriate. It is up to you as a storyteller whether or not you want to require, to just kind of allow this as coincidental magic that you get to do, or whether or not the player needs to have an appropriate paradigm and focus or what have you, and whether or not you want it to be narrative or meta-narrative, as it were. But this is something that you as a storyteller can propose rather than waiting for your players to ask for it. Like when they describe in general what they want to do, if they can come up kind of with an action or action adventure trope that fits with it, if you can come up with a magic justification for doing it, it really allows you to lean into the idea of presenting mages as super humans in some way, of just kind of greater. The maneuver system is something I wish we had a bunch more of. Have you ever used anything like that in a game?
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't super paradigmatic about it. It's real tough for your alchemist character who has to go back to his lab and decoct and make the chemicals that he needs for everything to say, okay, well, I want to make a real flashy entrance here, but I don't have any of those chemicals on me
Yeah.
to make my smoke bomb or whatever. But you can say, yeah, you did that in advance. You knew you were going to come to a place where you had to make a Darkwing Duck style entrance, so you have some smoke bombs. Spend a willpower point to say that, yeah, you got that on you. You did that in advance. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I later on, one of my recommendations is to introduce a mystical or a mundane preparedness stat, which again is something that Gumshoe uses. Praise be unto Robin Laws. So yeah, that I can certainly get behind. Are there any other mechanics that you think are kind of already baked into the World of Darkness that make it really good for action, especially as it pertains to Mage? Or do you want to talk about the things that maybe don't help action along?
I think we're good on the pros. Let's move on to the cons.
So the first one that comes to mind for me are the fact that you have 7 health levels and a gun can easily do like 14 points of damage, especially at like point blank, and you can't soak lethal as a mage under most circumstances.
Yeah, mages are real squishy. Of all the splats, they are the most human.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're not going to be able to take as many bullets as a werewolf or even a vampire. That does make an action movie style thing Chronicle a bit more difficult, unless you just arm everybody with rubber bullets and tasers. But that kind of takes away from the action movie.
So one of the things is we do have magic that can improve this, but one of the things to note is for whatever reason, Mage is pretty insistent on mages can't have stats above 5 using things like Better Body and such. Mummy the Resurrection had systems for everything basically going up to 8 because of the hekau of amulets, basically the ability to create amulets. So if you are interested in making resilient characters and giving interesting systems for what does it mean for someone to have a dexterity of 6, 7, or 8 or what have you, or strength of 9, or stamina of 7, they're there. And it's super interesting because it's like, oh, by the way, at this level of wits, you basically get 2 actions in a turn because of how fast you are. At this level of dexterity, you can dodge without deducting it from your normal pool just because of how utterly dexterous you are. At stamina 8, you can soak aggravated against difficulty 6 or something like that. So that is one little avenue to look down. Another one I've considered is just spend a point of quintessence to prevent the first damage from an attack, as a mage just kind of uses raw quintessence to fortify their pattern. Baked into M20 are 2 additional mechanics that they offer. One is the idea that when a mage is in combat, especially with another night folk, normally if you had 3 points of bashing damage and took 3 points of lethal damage, you would have 6 points of damage in total now, of which the first 3 are lethal and then the next 3 are bashing. The rule option given here is when a mage takes lethal or aggravated damage, it converts that damage first. So if you had 3 bashing and then you took 3 lethal, now you just have 3 lethal. And that is something proposed by the author to make it so that mages die less.
I think that's how we've always played it at my tables.
Oh, interesting.
Where if you take bashing, you put a little little half check mark, like from the upper left of the box to the lower right of the box. And then if you take lethal, you make that into an X. And if you take aggravated, you just fill in the box.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we've always done it. But yeah, that's how we've always done it. I didn't realize that was a new addition in Mage 20.
It makes it makes a specific aside. I don't know of a good comparison, but like if there's a rule you want, it's probably in Mage 20. I'm not even saying a rule for anything you want, but any interpretation, there is probably some text in there that probably supports it too.
Which makes sense given that Mage 20 was kind of supposed to be able to support all the previous versions of Mage.
Yeah.
So it has rules for, okay, so you want to play with the magic system that we had in second edition, which was less punishing than the one that we introduced and revised. So it maybe that's just maybe I'm just using older version of the rules. And
you're both ahead of and behind the times. Thank you, Time 5.
I'm retro.
Yep. Another option they also have, again, is the idea of cinematic damage, that you can soak lethal damage against difficulty 8. One that I am toying with is just getting rid of the idea of soak entirely, and that characters, as a role that is, and characters can automatically soak their stamina -1 and bashing damage off of each attack, and they can soak half their stamina rounded down in lethal damage for each attack, and then the superpower of aggravated is there's no way to soak it, and that just kind of gets rid of the soak roll, and you can set that at whatever you want for your game. Do you have any ways of dealing with the fact that you get 7 health levels and then die quickly?
Well, first I want to say that your tough as nails option there at the end is a great addition, because anything that removes die rolling from a storytelling game is a plus. you're making the game move faster. The one thing that I would say though about using quintessence as a way to soak damage is that kind of devalues the prime sphere a little bit.
See, that I am fine with. I don't think prime should exist as a sphere.
It's already real edge casey as to what you're using prime for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
If infusing your own pattern with quintessence is something you can do without prime, then that's just taken away a lot more of its usefulness.
Yeah, it's like during the period of time where Superman was as fast as the Flash, and you're like, okay, then what do we have the Flash for?
Because Superman is just the best at everything. He's Superman. It's right there in his name. He's the Superman.
Yeah, and then Flash is like, no, I can run so quickly, I can travel through time, eat it. We already talked about punitive failures and botches. Do you have any more to say about that before we move on to the crushing world of healing very slowly from injuries?
I'm not a fan of punitive failures. If punishing characters for bad die rolls, I understand that that's what rolling dice is for. It's for establishing how well you succeeded and how poorly you failed. But especially in an action genre, okay, so maybe you're going to get beat up and knocked around, but you're probably not going to lose the leg,
Yeah.
If you're playing within a genre, you got to keep everything within the genre.
There also needs to be room for the flip side of that, where if you're going to have it where that the players can suddenly have a complication go sideways that destroys their plans, there should periodically be unrealistic cases where the bad guys just completely screw up. I think it's one of those weird cases where it's like, no, random shit happens kind of all the time, but when we see it in a movie, we're like, that's not realistic. Actually, it's probably more realistic that out of nowhere, the guy that was chasing you gets hit by a bus. So,
yeah, you're running through the busy city streets. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone's going to not be paying attention enough and not slam on their brakes fast enough. Yeah, I can see that.
It's not quite as satisfying as you being the person who gets to do that showdown, but if you're gonna have realism affect your players, it should affect everyone else too.
Also, one thing that I want to go over about punitive failures affect player characters far more than they will ever affect an NPC, because just statistically, your players will always be rolling dice.
Okay.
So the NPCs, each individual NPC might roll dice 2 or 3 times in a session. Maybe. If that's a very, very top tier NPC, someone who's there for a lot of the action.
Yeah, 3-dot ally or something.
Right. your characters are going to be rolling dice all the time. And just statistically, that makes them more likely to fail.
Have you ever used or played any of the games where instead of rolling dice, you have like a hand of cards where before going into the encounter, you know that you will have 3 successes and 2 failures? And as the player, you kind of get to choose when to deploy those?
Yeah. I've played games where you have like a hand of cards, just regular playing cards, and you play whoever plays the high card, wins that encounter. So you don't know necessarily going in that, oh well, I got the 2 of hearts, so whatever happens there, I'm kind of screwed, because you might have higher than the 2 of clubs, I think is
Yeah.
how it works. I don't ask me, I'm not a poker player. So if the guy that I'm in this duel against, he plays the 2 of clubs, well, hot dog, my 2 of hearts suddenly has use. But yeah, I've played games like that, and it's a different mindset.
Yeah, suddenly success, dice, the economy is not dice, but successes. And you have the ability to be like, no, this is the thing I really need to win. I am fine sacrificing future success for this. And then you have games like Marvel Cinematic, where whenever whoever loses the encounter gets both cards. And that way, when there's a redeal, they now have better cards theoretically to work with. I was always curious how well those action economy games work, and I will look into them at some point. But if you are more interested in a mechanic that has pacing and such, that is a direction that you can look at. Things like that, where players more or less have some fixed pool of successes and they bid successes to get some sort of benefit. And that way they kind of get to choose when they fail, or get to lean in when they choose that they want to fail. Speaking of additional things that kind of don't work in an action setting, is really slow heal times. And this is one of the things where it's like, this is realism we don't need. Like, to recover from 7 points of lethal damage takes about a year. Bashing damage takes about a day, and this is why I hate Doe, because the moment you can punch someone for lethal damage, you're increasing the heal time by a factor of 365. That's a bit much for me.
I get what they're going for. I understand, if you are beaten or punched or run over by a car to the point where you've taken 7 points of lethal damage, you're hurting. This is no joke. You are on death's door at this point. You're not doing good. In the really real world in which you and I live, I hurt my knee in high school. That was 20 years ago, and my knee still hurts some days. It's technically healed as far as the damage boxes are concerned, but in reality, nah, man, that's forever. So I get where they're coming from there. Also, don't make Doe its own skill. Don't put that on the character sheet. Don't make it a secondary skill. Doe is it's a part of a paradigm. It's a whole lot of skills and rotes and all that added together. Doe is melee, it's brawling, it's expression, it's survival, it's performance, it's everything that you want to be. It's a way of life.
It's still lethal damage. I do like the
no, if you want to do lethal damage from punching, then hey, congratulations, you get a rote for that. But it's not something you just automatically do. That's ridiculous.
There's the one Doe rote where you can use like flaccid objects to do bashing damage. Like you can just hit someone with like a sash, and that'll do bashing damage where previously it wouldn't. And I'm like, wow, the Akashics are the undisputed champions of the Horizon locker rooms. The world's deadliest
rat tail.
Yep. He'll be in the hospital for 6 months. Like, another concern for me is this doesn't fit into all action games, but if you do want to do that kind of dark action, is there is no psychic penalty for violence. Like, mages don't have a morality stat. The closest we have is Jor. So when you choke someone to death, there is no systematic reminder that you killed someone with your bare hands, and whether or not that makes you feel awesome or terrible. Like, I feel as if the game should have a way of presenting that. One option that you have is killing someone literally requires succeeding at a willpower roll, or alternatively failing at a willpower roll, to prevent you from like curling into a ball for the remainder of the scene. I think it makes perfect sense that after a scene of intense violence, there should be some sort of almost mandatory cooldown, or some time that you could say something like your character is going to suffer a 3-die penalty for each 10 minutes that decreases by 1 for each 10 minutes afterwards, to just kind of come to terms with the fact that that has happened. Again, you may have battle-hardened people that are used to snapping necks in alleyways or what have you, or maybe it doesn't apply to certain night folk, but at the end of the day, this is Mage, and if you flat out murderate someone, it probably makes sense for there to be consequences. Do you know of any games that kind of do this well, or anything that you would take inspiration from for the representing violence and its consequences?
I hate going back to that same old well, but yeah, Unknown Armies does this real well. They have a system where they have, what do they call them? They call them sources of terror or sources of whatever, and they impact your stats, your beginning stats. So they can have, you have to make a violence check anytime that you get into an actual like physical fight with someone. Flame wars online are one thing, but if you or walking down the street and someone pulls a gun on you and you run at them to knock that gun out of their hand, that's a violence check. And too many failures on a violence check will make it so that if you're in that situation again, you might just curl up into a ball because you've experienced violence before. You've seen the horrible outcomes of what violence can do to a person, and you do not want any more part of that. But also, too many successes on that, too many hardened, where you become hardened to it and inured, might have an effect on your ability to interact with people in a non-violent way. If you're a hardened killer, then you're probably not getting invited, to high tea or anything, Yeah, so failed violence notches affect one of your stats, and hardened affect a different one of your stats. They're all real interesting systems, and they all affect how well you can do other things that are not necessarily in direct opposition of one another, because being violent and being in a social situation aren't necessarily the opposite of each other, but they're related in that way.
And the way we could add that to Mage is essentially adding a psychopathy track that if it gets too low, you have difficulty harming others or doing things that could theoretically be violent. And if it gets too high, you kind of start exhibiting some of the worst tendencies of the icy flaw, where people stop trusting you and maybe animals kind of rear up the back of their neck at you or what have you. But there are ways of systematically representing that. Did you ever read Hurt Locker? I know that Chronicles of Darkness had like an entire book on this, and I just haven't looked into it, but I know it exists.
I had not read that one, no.
Okay. I will add it to the show notes, and if you have comments on it, please tell us about it in Mage the Podcast Discord server. Another concern that kind of ruins a lot of action-y stuff, as Bryce alluded to earlier, is the whole idea of casting times. Now, this is something that has very much changed across editions, from 1E being like, here's the table of foci, and here's how long it takes to use them, and here are the mechanical benefits of using them, which in some ways I kind of miss. In Revised, anything that wasn't a rote, you suffered a fast casting penalty for, and now fast casting is basically defined as a penalty for you just kind of making something up to cause something to happen, which in M20 is done at a +1 difficulty. You can prepare effects ahead of time and use them in combat. How do you do combat or adventure preparation magic?
So much like how the Hollow Ones from your episode over that Paradigm deep dive use getting dressed up and doing their makeup and putting their hair in order, and getting into the spirit of being a Hollow One. That's part of their effect preparation. That's part of their paradigm. Getting into the mood of things. Kind of like that for an action oriented paradigm. Visiting Q to get your gadgets, or opening the trunk of your car and revealing the giant armory there, picking up the sawed-off shotgun and putting it in the holster on your back, and loading extra rounds into your pockets. All of that could be part of the ritual magic that you do before you go in to see someone or to do something.
Yeah, especially if you're leaning into that archetype paradigm, part of that is going to be that preparation where you have the map and you do the montage of everyone, this is how we're breaking into the vault, or this is how we're going to find the appropriate prison cell, and this is who's going to deal with the guards and such. That kind of preparation is the magic. It's one of those things where, like, you look at the technocracy and Entropy 3 effect, preventative maintenance. You're like, that's not magic. kind of is. I understand that it doesn't seem quite as flashy, but as Bryce said, that is part of creating the effect. And similarly, in both revised and late second edition, we get the idea of charms. Late 2E had the idea of lesser talismans. Charms are technically anything that just is a one-shot or a one-use item. Lesser talismans only require Prime 2 and are kind of a dedicated device for a rote, where you could be like, this is my forces gun, and this is my entropy gun.
This one's for fighting, and this one's for fun.
I like the fact that rhymed. That's pleasing.
Have you not seen Full Metal Jacket?
I have. I used to make kids at summer camp very briefly hold up their merit badge cards because they would always lose them and go, this is my merit badge card. There are many like it, but this one is mine. Some people found that hilarious. Other people did not. And I was 18.
I can see it going either way.
Yeah. There's a bit of a split audience there. But there are a lot of ways to weave magic into it, especially, again, invoking that mythic threat or hyper narrative, which in M20 and in previous editions, you get additional difficulty reductions for. Another way of doing this is with the idea of preparation slots. Characters aren't necessarily going to know specifically what they need to have, and I really hate when characters are like, I'm going to bring this much dental floss and this many bullets and this much, and you're just like, ugh. Some groups like that. I am not one of them. So generally, I will give my characters some number of preparedness slots, usually based on time and usually based on how much effort they want to put into preparing it, where they can spend a point to suddenly have something useful and common, a gun or some rope. For 2 points, they can get something more esoteric like a hand grenade or a disguise kit or a piece of jamming equipment, and for 3 points, they get something that is ludicrously specialized, such as a specific copy of a book that would be needed to decrypt a puzzle or an antiquated analog cell phone that's not affected by a jamming system. Terry, are you just stealing this from Blades in the Dark and Gumshoe? My answer, dear listener, is yes. Yes, I am.
In the Fallout setting Genesis game that I ran, the party had they were traveling junk merchants, so they had a wagon full of junk. And anytime they needed anything that wasn't written down on their character sheet as something that they had on them, because I personally, as a player and as a GM, hate equipment lists and hate shopping. So anytime they needed something that wasn't, too ridiculous, I would say, all right, well, go check and see if you have something that you can use for that purpose on your cart. And they would have to roll a knowledge junk roll just to see if they'd picked up something that they could repurpose. We're trying to get on the roof of this building. Well, there's not a ladder on the back of the cart, but you rolled well enough on your knowledge junk roll that you have a couple of old boxes and crates that you can stack on top of each other to get up there. Yeah, that'll work. Sure. Yeah, that'll get you there. It probably won't collapse energy and kill you. Probably.
So, for whatever reason, Amazon has gotten it into its head that I really want a 31-foot long fiberglass extensible pole.
Gotta check for traps.
And I don't know what these are for. And I'm like, oh, are these just flagpoles? Because I was looking at flags. And the first thing is, like a flagpole, but better. And there's no product usage shots, and all the reviews are like, this is a great extensible fiberglass pole, exactly what I needed. Like, no one is saying why they're using these 31-foot extensible fiberglass poles. But
oh, it's for like hanging lights on the outside of your house. If you're a business and you have a sign that you have to change the little letters out on,
there's not like a gripper portion of it. It's just an extensible pole. Like,
then they're just fucking with you in the reviews.
Maybe there's like an attachment kit that I didn't know about or something, that like somewhere out there's someone who's like, made specifically for 31-foot extensible fiberglass poles. But at least at my table, that would be a 1 point spend because apparently they're everywhere and I just don't know about them.
31st foot. That's what really gets me. Not
exactly. It's not even 30 foot.
31 foot. That's, I didn't know what I needed it for until I got it. And now I use it every day.
I'm using it right now. And now the real reason for this discussion. Some games are just built for action. We've talked about Bleeds in the Dark and how that is done. But when I think of a game that does a good job of promoting action, I think Torg. So what about Torg do you think does a good job of making things action-y-er? And what does Torg stand for, if anything?
Torg stands for that other role-playing game. It was originally created by West End Games, who listeners may know from the old D6 Star Wars game. That was their big thing, because somehow this little teeny tiny company that operated out of like a shoe manufacturing shop got the Star Wars license and created a lot of the extended universe information for the Star Wars universe. They made another role-playing game, which they called Torg, for that other role-playing game. As a setting, it's kind of weird. It's set on modern-day Earth that has been invaded by a group of other dimensions who are all here to steal our possibility energy. It's a weird game, but it's super fun. So, like I said, it's been invaded by these other realities, and each reality obviously is a little different from the others. Most of North America has been invaded by lizard men and dinosaurs, and the entirety of, well, not the entirety, but all but the coasts basically of the United States is covered in this jungle where technology doesn't work because in the reality that invaded us, technology doesn't work. And parts of Europe have been invaded by the cyber papacy, which is one of my favorites.
The cyberpope is
Because
just a good term.
cyberpope is a great term and people need to use it more often. So it's basically what if the Middle Ages aesthetic, but also cybernetics. So you have,
But also prayer magic. Like
yeah. So
it's
you have well, honest to God, prayer magic is answered, but also there are cyber deck. You can visit cyber heaven on occasion if you're a really good citizen, and you can see cyber god and all that fun stuff. It's a real weird setting.
But the backbone of that is that each of those regions, each of those invading realities, a cosm, has four basic stats that indicate how advanced the technology is, how advanced the social systems are, like are pan-national entities easy to do? Do people manifest psionics? The role of faith and belief is one, as well as magic. So each of those four knobs can move independently. So as opposed to a lot of games where it's like, there's magic but no science, and vice versa. This is like, no. You can have both. You can have magitech. You can have cyber wizards and so on and so forth. Or you can have psychics, but science isn't that terribly advanced or something like that. Each of these cosms has a different mix of them. In addition, each of these areas has axioms, which are fundamental modifications to the rules that apply in that area. And one of my favorite is in the whatever the term is for the pulp action 1920s style sci-fi.
The Nile Empire.
Yeah, the Nile Empire. No one ever really dies. Like, not in an all dogs go to heaven kind of way, but like if you punch a guy out a window, like obviously they're going to land on like a cart of hay or something like that, which allows both heroes and villains to always seemingly come back. But if you flat out like kill a guy, like if you hold a gun to someone's face and fire, everyone's like, oh, that was uncalled for. I'm trying to subjugate all of humanity and rule over them with my mind control reptiles, but you're evil. And I just like that as an idea, like all the things where the Joker's like, wait, you want me to work with actual Nazis? I'm comic book evil. I'm not evil. And I very much like that.
It's got a lot going on. It's a real fun game. I strongly recommend it. If we can get into my favorite cosm is it's kind of a Mad Max plus demons. It's called Tharkold. So there's these demons that invaded this reality, and they need a certain level of magic to survive. But to oppress the population of humans that were there, they've slowly been lowering the humans' ability to do magic over time to such a low level that now there's not enough magic left to support the demon's existence. So those knobs you can adjust, they've adjusted in such a way that they've kind of screwed themselves. So now they've raised the technology level high enough that they can just be cyber demons. So hey, they're going to get along fine.
I also like that the contrivance there is that this maelstrom bridge to connect realities, this army's coming across, and Alexander, the guy in charge of Russia at the time, just nukes it. And the demons are like, he nuked his own people to screw over someone else. I like the cut of your jib. Care to join? Like, it's like, well played, Russia.
He's evil enough that he could be a demon too. So.
But mechanically, though, to keep this action and adventure thing, mechanically, though, since this is an action adventure game, it has a lot of mechanics to really ramp up that drama. And one of the things that it does is all dramatic events are resolved in a 4-part sequence. It doesn't matter if you are trying to prevent the ritual to have the demons come through the portal, or if you're trying to disarm the missile before the launch sequence completes, or you need to destroy one of the beacons that is holding the reality zone in place. There's this 4-part thing that involves a deck of some sort. How does it work?
So the drama deck, this is something from the original system. It's carried over to Torg Eternity, which is the current version of Torg from Ulysses Spiele. The way it works is you have a deck of cards. You have 4 actions that you have to take in order to complete your task. And it could be something like you have to stop the bomb from going off and destroying this warehouse full of puppies, you have to spot the bomb. That's one action. So that's an alertness roll. You have to, following that, you have to you find it up in the rafters. You have to climb up there with an athletics roll. That's a second one. Once you're up there, you have to make a demolitions roll to actually defuse the bomb. And fourth, you have to make a party roll because you just saved all those puppies and you're great. So the way it works is you have this deck of cards. Each card will have some combination of A, B, C, and D on it. And as soon as you get to 10 cards flipped, you're out of time. The bomb blows up. The portal opens. The demon comes through. Whatever was the bad thing was going to happen has happened. So each card has A, B, C, and D. Not all cards have all letters. And you have to do these in order. So if the first card that you draw is just B and C, well, that round you're still looking for that bomb. You haven't found that bomb. Second card you draw, oh hey, finally there's A and C. Great. You can make that roll to spot the bomb, and so on and so forth until you've completed all 4 actions, or you've drawn 10 cards and you're out of time.
Yeah, and the neat thing behind that is it's always 4 steps, and you always have at most 10 cards. So everyone knows going into that dramatic showdown ahead of time that there will be 4 steps. And this kind of creates a set structure which you'd think would be repetitive, but since those 4 steps are going to change each time, there's also rules on how to press to get 2 done in a turn, or instead of a botch just causing the bomb to blow up could cause you to go back a step, where suddenly, this is the decoy bomb and there's a separate bomb that we have to find, and suddenly that represents going back a step on the find roll or something like that. But the fact that it gives you a very straightforward narrative outline, everyone knows what to expect. And I think that's like a real strength. And it allows for like scheduling where you're like, hey, this is how long this should take to get through, and also leaves an envelope for players to say, hey, this is how I think this should work. And I think that kind of framework can be super powerful. Like some people would say it's not very flexible, but it's a game of narrative contrivances, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable one. So,
and of course, if you get to round 10 and the last 3 cards that you've drawn have just had A, B, C, and no D, then you can always push where you spend all of your resources that you have available to you to just go ahead and do everything all at once. If you're falling behind and you got to do everything, or the world is going to end, the villains are going to win, all that fun stuff, there is a way that you can go in and just make one last ditch heroic effort, because it's a game at the end of the day, it's a game about being a hero.
And one of the things that's also kind of interesting is the game is very on its face that, like, yeah, characters are going to die. Like, people are going to make poor choices. And it's pretty big about when 2 things. One, the player doesn't level up, the group levels up. So all experience is kind of common among the entire group, as in everyone in a group is going to have the same experience level. And whenever a character dies or is knocked out of action for an extended period of time, the person that replaces them has the same amount of experience, but just kind of built out differently. This is pretty similar to one of the systems that I really like in Star Trek Adventures, where, hey, I'm the science officer and I need to stay and I need to analyze these rock samples, but the rest of you are going to go down to the planet to do this away mission to negotiate with the village to retrieve the ancient artifact or what have you. That's actually a subspace warp manifold or what have you. The game has mechanics to be like, hey, this is how you generate an extra that a player gets to play. That way they're not bored to tears while everyone else gets to do fun stuff and fire phasers and stuff. So any mechanic that lets you do that, I think, is useful. And in an action game where it's like, oh, we need to scramble to solve this problem, having those extras on hand that a character can suddenly step into that are capable, but capable in a different way, I think is something useful to both increase the tension because it allows you to split up the group, but maintain the idea that all 4 players are playing narratively in the same space at the same time, and no one has to wait 30 minutes for the narrative to get back to their turn.
Yeah, and that's something that goes all the way back to Ars Magica, where you have, your wizard characters who are, well, they're spending, the next 6 months locked in their towers researching spells. So rather than roleplay that for the next however many sessions, because holy cow, that's boring, we're gonna have.
You're not a real fan.
you're gonna play one of their retainers who has to go out and get the esoteric materials they need for their research.
And it is up to you and the type of game you want to run to say how capable that additional character is. So that kind of comes to the end of what I had. Did you have any other games that inspire you for action and adventure?
Not anything in particular. Any game can be action-oriented. Any game can be an adventure. In fact, all games that we play should be an adventure of some sort or another. If not, then that's really boring and, go pick up the Monopoly board. Yeah, you can take your inspiration from just about anywhere if you know what you're looking for and you know how to bend systems to do what you want them to do.
Yep. My only statement is if you're going to change something, tell your players ahead of time so they can kind of plan on it. And if they have any ideas, listen to them. One of the questions that came up a bunch when dealing with how to World of Darkness was the questions of how to speed things up. One of the things that has happened across editions is the nature of combat has changed. For instance, previously they used to have something called Serpentine Initiative where you would roll for initiative and then the person with the lowest initiative would declare what they are doing. So you would list what you would do in reverse order and then you would resolve them in forward order. This to me,
man, I didn't even realize that they had changed that. That's how far behind I am. That's just how I've always done it.
Yeah.
Oh man.
In M20, the way it is at least initially depicted, because even in M20 it is shown 2 ways, is when you act, it goes from highest initiative to lowest initiative, but you always have the ability to wait and have the ability to jump in before another player would act. I don't feel strongly about which is which. To me, the highest initiative acting first kind of makes more narrative sense. Otherwise, we wind up in these places where the person with the lowest initiative is going to shoot at someone who's already killed, and now they have to spend a willpower point to change their action or something like that. So I have no preference as to which one's faster. I think the current way it's listed in M20 in not using Serpentine and just allowing players to interrupt other players is fine, and I think that holds together narratively better. One of the things that you'll get into really weird areas is if the person who goes first decides to split their action because they want to save some dice for dodge, but ultimately doesn't wind up using those dice, they've just kind of just burned some dice. So for me, it's one of those things where you can stipulate a certain number of dice, and that now becomes a static defense value, where for every 2 dice you dedicate to dodging in a round, attack rolls need 1 additional success. So that replaces a moving value with a static value, which on the whole, to me, is faster. Another one is you never have to save dexterity dice to dodge an explosion. One of the recommended sidebars they have is mages have a bunch of additional senses, as it were, through the spheres. And basically every sphere but mind gives you a way to sense an explosion coming, and you can just kind of flat out try and get out of dodge. And I am a big fan of everyone gets at least 1 free dodge in combat. That kind of makes things way less lethal. But if you're trying to speed things up, dropping Serpentine, making dodge a static defense value based on the number of dice that you dedicate towards dodge in a round, all kind of speed things up. Another one I've seen is that weapon difficulties on the attack roll don't change. That certainly makes lookup make more sense. But one of the things I would recommend is kind of breaking it down by class and just having small, medium, and large weapons or what have you. And all of the ones in a class have the same difficulty. So large weapons are going to be harder to fire, but generally it may do more damage or something like that. That's another way that you can just kind of make combat go faster. So it was interesting. We put out this call and we're talking about action, but a lot of the questions came out to be combat questions. And yes, Old World of Darkness has some clunky ass combat rules.
Fewer die rolls. That's how you speed up combat. You have fewer die rolls.
Yeah.
So anything that you can make a static entry instead of a random die roll, like the aforementioned you have static soak, that will speed combat up.
And another thing you can do is part of the justification for this is spheres. The idea that even without activating an official rote or ability, your character is supernaturally empowered in some way, and they just kind of get this benefit. And if it prevents them from dying, I don't really find that to be a cheat.
Yeah, your character can't just do magic. Your character is magic.
Yeah, and I'm also fine saying the avatar does it, where it's like, yeah, the avatar doesn't want you to die either. But that gets into a question of what you consider the role in the avatar to be. And with that, Bryce, thank you so much for joining us. This was delightful, and this will pair nicely with our episode that we did on horror. If we are interested in finding out what you're up to, where can we do that?
Well, you can find me online. I'm on Twitter at Sandchigger, SANDCHIGGER. I am on Darker Days Radio at darker-days.org. You can find me all over, basically anywhere on the internet. If you find a Sandchigger, odds are it's me, except for sometimes it's this other guy who I haven't seen for about 15 years. So I can probably stop putting that in as a
qualifier.
As a qualifier. But, maybe not. But yeah, I'm Sandchigger. I'm everywhere. Come find me.
If we continue the series, what genre do you want to do next?
Have you done sci-fi?
No.
Yeah, I think that I would like to look into how are the traditions affected in a sci-fi setting, because, the technocracy is the easy answer there. It's the easy out. So I think I'd like to look into traditions in a sci-fi setting.
Okay, cool. I look forward to doing that. And when that happens, we will tell everyone. Cool beans. Thanks, Bryce.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It was
Sure.
super fun.
You've been listening to Mage the Podcast, which should only be used in a properly ventilated area away from open flames. The show is made possible by our executive producers, who are Anders S., Andrew K., Andrew E., Brendan, Bryce Perry, Christopher P., Chris Zach, Ira Grace, Jenna F., Justin B., John H., John Magnuson, Josh Golden, Michael Parker, Richard Bat Brewster, William C., William M., and Jay Sunzern. Today's shout-out is to Josh Golden of Golden Age Stories, who's running a Mage the Ascension Technocracy live play called Technogate, and we're going to be talking with him real soon about that, along with a roundup of some other live plays that I found. If you'd like to become an executive producer, like Josh, get a chat color in Discord, and have me make up something about you periodically, as well as receiving our executive producer-only podcast, So What You Playin', you can become one by clicking on Become a Supporter in the show notes or through the episode entries on our webpage. If you super liked this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com or at magethepodcast on Twitter. We have a Hop in Discord community at discord.me/magethepodcast. You can subscribe to our show on Spotify, Anchor, TuneIn, iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, or the podcatcher of your choice. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to magethepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye.